Hey, good afternoon, guys. I'm going to post my Chapter 2 video now. Hoping to get the Chapter 3 video by the end of the semester, of the end of this week. So let me pull up our syllabus so we can look at our schedule. If you go down to the schedule, we are currently in week 3. You will be covering Chapter 3 this week, so you should have already read Chapters 1 and 2, and this is my Chapter 2 video lecture. It'll be quick. I'm just going to cover some of the guidelines, not very much, but you're responsible for reading the chapter. And then we'll get into Chapter 3 this week. So you'll read the chapter. I'll try to get the lecture to you by either I would say probably Thursday, maybe Friday morning. But your first quiz will be due on Friday. So I'll post the quiz on Friday morning. Yeah, I'll post the quiz on Friday morning, so you'll complete it on Friday by the end of the day, and then your video discussion number 1 is due on Sunday. Okay, so remember the video discussions. I will assign groups soon, so you'll know which group you're in for this particular video discussion. You remember you'll be in a group of 3 or 4 other students. Okay, so you'll record your 3 to 5 minute video, and I'll give you the questions in the assignments tab, and you will answer those questions and in that video. Okay, so the questions will be, I don't know, what did you think about the reading? And you'll just say, well, I really liked the reading. I learned a lot. Whatever it is that you want to respond. Okay, remember the videos have a maximum duration of 5 minutes. Okay, so don't post any videos longer than 5 minutes. And then you'll get into, so whenever you complete it, you'll submit it. You'll send the YouTube link. We'll just go ahead and post the YouTube links to the discussion board, so everyone in your group will have access to it. And then you'll be responsible for watching everyone's videos in your group. Okay, so not the entire class, it's just your group. Okay, so you'll watch 3 or 4 videos, and then you'll respond to those videos on the discussion board, and that'll be due on next Friday. Okay. All right. So there's a lot going on this week. I'm going to start off with the Chapter 2 video lecture. This is the video lecture from last week. Tried to get it to you last week, but just everything that's going on, I'm trying to get these as quickly as I can. So the next video lecture will probably be on Friday. So I'm sorry for the delay, but nonetheless, you're still responsible for reading chapters 1 through 3. Okay? All right, so going back to the lecture, Chapter 2 talks about the guidelines for a healthy diet. And if you've already noticed, there are several guidelines that were mentioned throughout the chapter. USDA published the recommended daily allowances, and that's what was used for the longest time over the 20th century. But lately things have changed a little bit. Well, not really changed, just kind of added to it and made it more structured, more organized, so that people have a better opportunity to create a healthy diet. So we'll talk about the RDAs. We'll talk about the dietary reference intakes, or the DRIs. And then we'll get into the dietary guidelines for Americans, and that's a document. I'm not going to read over it word for word, but at least give you some basic principles. And then we'll get into the MyPlate, which is the most current guideline, and then food labels. And I'll kind of give you a description of how we use food labels to determine our diets. Okay. Guidelines for the U.S. Population have been published ever since the late 1800s, and you can see here. I'm not going to go through these, but you can see that they've been built upon throughout the 20th century, and all the way up to the most current version, which is the MyPlate, which was published in 2012. In my lifetime, I've been I guess following or been exposed to the food guide pyramid, and then finally my pyramid before the MyPlate came out. So I don't know exactly when you guys were born, but you can look and probably remember at least the My Pyramid. Growing up through elementary and learning about nutrition as you continued on with your education. But nonetheless, in 2011, MyPlate was published, and that's the most recent version of the guidelines for nutrition, or nutritional guidelines. Let's see. I guess this slide is just talking about the reason why these recommendations exist is because either people they don't know how to construct a healthy diet, or they simply just don't care. But for those who don't know, and for those who do care, this is an opportunity for them to follow a guideline, follow a source that will help them create a healthy diet. So that's the whole purpose of this. And really it all falls under the Healthy People 2020, which is the national health objectives. These objectives have been published ever since the 1980s, every 10 years. And this depending on the health climate of our country, different set of objectives are published every time. For the 2020, there's a strong emphasis on health promotion and disease prevention, and what the U.S. government is trying to do is increase the length and quality of healthy life, not just the length of years or the number of years of life, but they also want to make those long years healthy and full of quality, high quality, if you will. So trying to let people live longer and live longer, healthier years of life. There's also a high prevalence of obesity and chronic disease, and you know that through several of your other courses, so I'm not going to really touch base on that a whole lot, but really that's the whole purpose. Is we're trying to, or not we as me, but like as a country, we're trying to decrease the prevalence and trying to decrease healthcare costs and other adverse situations that are caused by chronic disease. So when we look at what are some of the risk factors for chronic disease, or some of the contributing factors for chronic disease, we definitely look at nutrition and physical activity. So we're trying to improve diet and enhance or increase physical activity. So you can see here the Healthy People states their goals for 2020. I'm not going to go over these, but I just wanted you to see them. Give you an opportunity if you've never seen these before. But more specifically, we're going to look into the guidelines. And so whenever we look at the guidelines that I'm going to focus on throughout this lecture are guidelines that are used to help people create a healthy diet. So you don't necessarily have to do all four of them or engage in all four. But as a student, it's important for you to understand, what's going on with each, so that if you're helping someone construct or create a healthy diet, if you choose to select one of these guidelines, that you'll know, how what to look at and how to put together a meal plan to help individuals improve their diet. Okay, so when we look at dietary reference intakes, in fact, there's actually 4 dietary reference intakes. You have the estimated average requirements, the recommended daily allowances, which was published with the USDA reports early in the 1900s, or earlier in the 1900s. Then you have adequate intakes, and then you have tolerable upper limit intake or upper intake levels. Okay, these all comprise of the dietary reference intakes. Really, I'm just going to look at 3 of them: the estimated average requirements, the recommended daily allowances, and the tolerable upper intake levels. The estimated average requirements. This is the nutrient intake that's that meets the needs of at least 50% of healthy individuals. So if we take a look at every healthy individual in the country, these are the nutrients that are needed for those particular people. Okay, so this is more population based, whereas the recommended daily allowances, this is guidelines for individuals. Okay, so these are the nutrient intakes that are sufficient to meet the needs of healthy individuals. Okay, so when we look at estimated average requirements, this is, if we're using this as a guideline, then we're saying, well, most people require this, most people require that. But when we look at recommended daily allowances, we're looking at individuals. Okay, so based on your gender, based on your physical activity level, based on your body makeup, these are the particular nutrients that are needed for you to maintain a healthy weight. Okay, so if we can think of estimated average requirements as being population-based, this is just an estimate. This is based on average, whereas excuse me, recommended daily allowances is based on individual by individual. Okay, the tolerable upper intake levels, those are the maximum recommended daily intake for particular nutrients. Okay, so for example, in the last chapter it mentioned that the maximum intake or maximum recommended intake for sodium would be 2,300 milligrams per day. Okay, that would be an example of a tolerable upper intake level. That's not the recommended dietary allowance or the requirement. The recommended daily allowance would be something a lot lower, saying that you at least need this to maintain a healthy weight or a healthy blood level or whatever it is that you're measuring. The tolerable upper limit intake is saying if you're exceeding this number, you're putting yourself at adverse risk for health condition. Okay, or increased risk for an adverse health condition. Okay, so tolerable upper level intake levels do not mean recommendations. They're saying don't exceed this, or else you're going to be putting yourself at major risk for health complications. Okay, so that could be saturated fat, it could be sodium, it could be sugar, it could be any of the nutrients really if we don't eat in moderation. Here's just another. Here's like a graphical representation of these dietary reference intakes. I was gonna say recommended intakes, dietary reference intakes. So you can see that the estimated average requirement is population based. It's about 50. Well, it says 50%, but the majority of healthy people, this is what's required for them to be healthy. Whereas the RDAs or the recommended daily allowances are the individual based. So these are the factors, or these are the nutrients that are needed by individuals. And then, like I said, the upper level intake is the maximum that can be consumed, the maximum nutrient that can be consumed before the onset of adverse health conditions. Okay. And then on the other end of the dietary reference intakes is the estimated energy requirements and the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. Now these guidelines here specify energy requirements, and then also the distribution of energy per nutrient. Okay. So the estimated energy requirements are energy requirements that are needed per individual based on several factors. You can see their age, gender, height, weight, physical activity level. We'll get more into that as the semester progresses. Okay, so if we're thinking about creating a healthy plan for a particular individual, We can't just say, okay, well, this is what's average, this is what you need to eat. I mean, we have to really start looking at their personal characteristics in order to identify how much of which nutrient is needed for them to maintain a healthy body weight or a healthy diet. Okay. In terms of acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges, these are the percentage ranges that each nutrient. And remember, when we talk about macronutrient, we're talking about the nutrients that are needed in large amounts. So protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Let's say, so most of our energy consumption should come from carbohydrates. 45 to 60% of calories should come from carbohydrates. 20 to 35% of calories should come from fat, and then 10 to 35% of calories should come from proteins. Okay, excuse me, I'm getting dry. Sorry about that. So based on how your body uses, and again, this can be individualistic as well. So for example, for proteins, I mean, if you're not physically active, you're not constantly tearing down and rebuilding your muscle fibers, then probably 35% of energy coming from protein is not needed, because you probably won't be using all 35% of or all of your protein intake. So a person who's not physically active perhaps would have less of a need for protein intake if they're not going to use it, because remember, we don't store protein. Okay. The next set of guidelines is the dietary guidelines for Americans. This is remember, this is something different. All these guidelines are different. All of them can be used to create a diet or help someone create a diet, or for you to improve a diet. But these are separate guidelines. So we talked about the reference, the dietary intakes. Now here are your dietary guidelines for Americans, and then we'll move on into the My Plate and then food labels. Okay. The dietary guidelines for Americans is a set of diet and lifestyle recommendations designed to promote health and reduce the risk of overweight, so obese and other chronic diseases. So the purpose of the dietary guidelines is very similar to the Healthy People 2020 initiative, in that it's designed to help people get healthier, help our population get healthier. Okay, these guidelines are recommendations for anyone ages 2 and older, and you can see that there are 5 overarching guidelines, and the first one is following a healthy eating pattern across a lifespan. So it's not only about eating particular foods; it's about creating a diet that you're committed to for a prolonged period of time. Okay. Focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount. So important to eat a variety of foods, not just the variety of nutrients. I mean, we need to consume all the nutrients, but even within the nutrients, to eat a variety of foods. We talked a lot about that in chapter 1, and same thing with nutrient density. It says here to limit calories from added sugars and to unsaturated fats, and to reduce sodium intake. We'll see whenever we get into carbohydrates that sugars, there's a couple of different types of carbohydrates. You have your simple carbohydrates, your complex carbohydrates, and then there's dietary fiber. The sugars is in reference to the simple carbohydrates, which means that so whenever we consume food, the digestive system breaks it down to its simplest components. Okay, so when it breaks down carbohydrates, it'll break it down to its simplest component, which is glucose. Okay, well, sugar is glucose. Okay, glucose is the simplest form. Sugar is the simplest form. It's so when we think of sugar and glucose, they're synonymous. They mean the same thing. Okay, so what happens with simple sugar or simple carbohydrates or simple glucose? It goes straight into your bloodstream. Okay, it raises the blood sugar level. Now, if you're consuming simple carbohydrates for immediate energy, meaning I need energy now because I'm going to run a 4-hour marathon or play in a 3-hour soccer game or whatever it is, then it's fine. It's immediate energy. But unfortunately, most people don't. They don't expend that energy immediately. They'll consume a food, it raises the blood sugar, but they don't expend that energy. So that elevated blood sugar, especially over an extended period of time. So it becomes a habitual behavior where they're constantly raising their blood sugar, and they're not doing any physical activity afterwards. Then it starts to deteriorate the arterial supply. It starts damaging the blood vessels, and starts leading to other adverse conditions like plaque buildup, atherosclerosis, heart attack, stroke. So it's important not to eat added sugar. Now, we still need sugar, we still need carbohydrates, but the type of carbohydrates we consume should be complex, and we'll talk more about that, I think, in chapter 4, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Saturated fats, those are your solid fats, your fats that are solid at room temperature. The reason why they're so detrimental to health is because they remain solid whenever they enter your body. They enter your blood system. I know that's kind of hard to believe, because whenever we eat something, we chew it up and we break it down. But the melting temperature for these particular products that have high levels of saturated fat is much greater than our body temperature. My body temperature is 98.6 degrees. Well, it takes a lot more than that to melt these particular products to their liquid form. Okay, so a saturated fat will enter the body as a solid, and it'll reaccumulate inside the body. So yeah, sure, like if you're eating cheese, for example, yeah, we can break it down when we eat, but once it gets into the blood system, if there's a damage to the artery, it's gonna one of those molecules is gonna stick to the damaged wall in the artery, and another one's gonna come by and stick to that. Another one's gonna come by and stick to that, and eventually we have this plaque buildup. Well, all that is just an accumulation of solid fats, of small molecules of solid fat that are reconvened to form a solid mass inside the blood system. Okay, so if we want to try to limit or prevent the onset of any plaque buildup inside our arteries, then it's important for us to eat a minimal amount of saturated fat, if any at all. Okay. Sodium intake raises blood pressure, especially if the sodium intake is high. Reaching the upper limits, or if it exceeds what's the recommended is 2,300 milligrams per day. That raises the blood pressure, which puts a lot of strain on your kidneys. I mean, if you don't know about your kidneys, all the blood in the body goes into the kidneys to get filtered. Any waste is eliminated through urine. All the good blood is returned back to the circulatory system. So with high blood pressure going into the kidneys, that's going to put a lot of strain on the kidneys. So people with chronic hypertension or high blood pressure typically experience kidney failure, and they'll have to undergo dialysis and wait for a kidney transplant. So we can prevent that by decreasing the amount of sodium we consume in our diet. Now, I'm not saying no sodium, just within the recommended levels. And then you can see here, shift to healthier food and beverage choices. I mean, we have to eat, we have to drink. Might as well start identifying healthier foods and healthier drinks, so that whenever we do drink, whenever we do eat, especially habitually, especially extended period of time, lifelong, we're limiting all the times that we drink a sugary soda. Well, we've replaced it with a non-sugary soda or water or some other beverage that over the course of time, we could tell substantial differences. Okay. So these next couple of slides will give you examples of what foods to eat. I don't want to go over these, and spend more time on them, but you can definitely see those, go through them on your own lecture notes. And then, you know, the dietary guidelines for Americans should also be accompanied with the physical activity guidelines for Americans, which is at least 3 days of vigorous activity for 20 minutes, or 4 days of moderate activity for at least 30 minutes. Okay, so most days of the week we should be engaged in some type of physical activity, whether it's exercise or yard work, or, you know, just walking around at a fast pace, or whatever it is. But these physical activity guidelines were meant to help contribute to the decline in chronic diseases. The next guideline is the MyPlate guidelines. This was the latest guideline that was published. I believe I mentioned it was 2011. So it hasn't been around too long, but it still serves as another guide to creating healthy meals and a healthy diet. So what the MyPlate guideline says is that, and you can see here, whenever you look at the picture, it's kind of color coded to what portions of your plate should be, you know, what it should be, you know, the 5 food groups, which are fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins, and dairy. So what they're saying is that pretty much half of your plate should be comprised of fruits and vegetables, a quarter should be comprised of grains, and another quarter should be comprised of proteins. So, you know, that's the plate. Now, if you choose to do so, you can eat dairy products, but at a very minimal basis. I mean, dairy, whenever we look at the content of dairy, a lot of saturated fat, a lot of short chain saturated fats, which are the most difficult to break. So if you imagine eating a solid, you know, piece of cheese, it's going to take a high temperature for that cheese to melt. So, like I said, it'll stay solid inside your body. You can see here on this slide, you can see the grains. This is just more guidelines. You know, how much, you know, what amount of each of the food groups that we should consume with our meals. But again, when we look at the plate, about half of it is fruits and vegetables, and the other half is comprised of grains and proteins. There's just some more slides that you can go through. The concept of empty calories or discretionary calories, these are food products that we eat that have a high caloric intake, but they have a very low nutrient intake. In fact, a lot of these foods, like for example soda, soda has, let's say if we drink a 12-ounce can, if we say Dr. Pepper, I believe it's about 40 grams of carbohydrates, which seems like, hey, that's a good source of carbohydrates. But when we look at it, all of those carbohydrates are sugar. Okay, so we're consuming 40 grams of carbohydrates. What type of carbohydrate? It's sugar, and that's all we're consuming. All of the calories are coming from sugar. Those are considered empty calories. They're calories, yes, we're getting energy, but we're not getting any other nutrient value whatsoever. Whereas if you eat something, let's say like a rice, for example, I mean, you're getting the carbohydrates, you're getting the fiber, you're getting some, you know, tons of vitamins and minerals. I mean, there's so many more nutrients that are provided in, you know, the same caloric content of rice than there is for just a soda. That's just one nutrient, which is, you know, if it's not used, then can lead to adverse conditions. Okay, another example are donuts. I mean, that's the example the book gives. Okay, and then the last guideline that I'll talk about are the food labels. These are the food labels that are where I thought I had another slide. Okay. All right. Let me go back to it. Alright, so food labels these are nutrition facts labels, are required by law to be located on every package that's sold, of every food that's sold in the U.S. Okay, so they'll either look like this, or on smaller packages they'll actually just be, you know, just a bunch of writing. But for most part, you know, nutrition facts labels look like this, and it helps consumers, especially when they're purchasing foods, to determine really which foods to purchase in order to construct a healthy diet. Okay, So you can see that, well, first of all, the first thing I want you to point out, or I want to point out, is that look at the serving size. Okay, now it says this serving size at the very top. It says 8 servings per container, which means if we consume the entire container, we would have to multiply all these numbers by 8. Okay, all these numbers down here, so total fat 8 grams, saturated fat 1 gram, cholesterol 0 milligrams, sodium 160 milligrams, total carbs 37 grams. All of these numbers are numbers that correspond to one serving size. So if I ate one serving size, and how big is the serving size? We'll look up at the very top. It tells you 2/3 of a cup. So that means if you ate 2/3 of a cup of whatever this is, I don't even know what it is. If you ate 2/3 of this cup, I mean 2/3 of a cup of this food product, whatever it is, you'll be consuming 8 grams of fat, 1 of which are saturated. You'll be consuming 160 milligrams of sodium and 37 carbohydrates and 3 grams of protein. Okay, but if you ate all the entire container, if you ate all 8 servings, you would simply multiply those numbers by 8. So if you ate the entire container, then the total fat content would be 64 grams, because 8 times 8 is 64. You'd also be consuming 8 grams of saturated fat. Okay, so it's important to understand that, especially if you're working with people who are trying to construct a diet or a healthy diet, that it's important to see this, because the serving size. Well, the serving size is stipulated by the U.S. government. Okay, so I believe the USDA or the federal, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, one of those government agencies. So they tell every company what is a food size of this. Okay, so the company can't dictate what the serving size is. They have to abide by what the federal agency says. Okay, so if the federal agency says that or determines that a serving size is 2/3 of a cup, well, that's what they have to list. Okay, they have to list one serving size is 2/3 of a cup, and then they have to list how many nutrients are in one serving size, which in this case is 2/3 of a cup. Okay, all right. So that's the first thing to know, is number of serving sizes and how large the serving size is. Okay, and then remember, all these numbers are referring to one serving size. Okay, all right. So when we look at total fat, what you don't see there is unsaturated fat. Unsaturated fat is considered the healthier fat, because it's liquid at room temperature, meaning that it's liquid inside your body. It doesn't clog up your arteries like saturated fat does, or even trans fat. I haven't talked about that. We'll talk about that, I believe, in chapter 5 or chapter 6. One of those chapters where we're talking about the nutrients, the specific nutrients. So if we're looking at total fat content, well, it says underneath saturated fat 1 gram. So that means of the 8 grams of total fat, 1 gram of that is saturated fat. 0 grams is trans fat. So whatever is left, whatever other fat there is, so the other 7 remaining grams of fat is unsaturated. Okay, meaning the liquid fat. Okay, when you look at total carbs, you see 37 grams of total carbohydrates, one of which is sugar. That's the simple carbohydrate. The other type of carbohydrate that's absorbed into the body are the complex carbohydrates. So whatever's remaining is complex carbohydrates. So 37 minus 1 would be 36 grams of complex carbohydrates. But then you see here this dietary fiber, it says 4 grams. Okay, well, dietary fiber, we don't actually ingest dietary fiber. We chew it up, we break it down mechanically, it goes into the digestive system, it gets exposed to all the chemicals, but when it comes to reaching our small intestine, where nutrient absorption occurs, fiber is not absorbed. We cannot absorb fiber. The benefit of fiber is that it passes through the digestive system and it cleans out the system, and it helps prevent the onset of adverse health conditions, but it's not absorbed. So we don't calculate fiber into caloric ingestion. Okay, so when we look at carbs, we're only looking at simple carbs, which are known as sugars, and then the complex carbs, which are not listed, but it's whatever's left over. So when we look at total carbs, 37, 1 gram is simple, the other 36 are complex carbs. Okay, and then finally we have the protein at the bottom. There are no differences in the types of proteins. If you consume 3 grams of protein, you're consuming 3 grams of protein. Okay, and then at the bottom it lists a couple of prominent vitamins and minerals, but we'll talk more about that later. I believe after the first quiz or the second quiz later on this semester. Okay. So food labels, they help consumers, people who are purchasing foods make better decisions, especially if they're trying to create or construct meals. It has the nutrition facts panel, which I just listed, which I just talked about, and here are some descriptions of each of the components of the nutrition facts label. You can look at that, and it's in your book. And it also lists the ingredients list. Okay, I talked about the ingredients list briefly in the Chapter 1 video lecture, where the most prominent ingredient is listed first. Okay, so when we looked at not organic foods, processed foods, usually the ingredients list looks like a paragraph. Those are foods that we should typically try to avoid. Natural foods, natural food products, the ingredients list is either one ingredient, which is the product, like walnuts, for example. I mean, the ingredients list, ingredients, walnuts. That's as natural as you get. That is a natural food. I'm eating a walnut as it came on Earth. There was no processing whatsoever. Now, they had to process the shell, and, take the shell off, and, what is it called, deshell or whatever it is. But the food that I'm eating is the food that it came on Earth. That's why the ingredients, it's just one ingredient, walnuts. So, if we're looking at the ingredients list, and lots of times that'll determine, what foods we should eat. If there's a paragraph, then those are processed foods. Those are foods that we need to minimize or avoid altogether. Okay. All right, well, that concludes my lecture. Obviously, there's a lot more of Chapter 2 that you need to cover, so make sure that you've read Chapter 2. Start reading Chapter 3. I will post my video lecture for Chapter 3 later on this week, and I will start preparing the quiz so that that'll be available to you starting Friday morning. Okay? All right, well, you guys have a good day. Let me know if you have any questions.